Leverage. Leverage is the use of borrowed capital to increase the magnitude of portfolio position. Leverage is a way to increase portfolio return relative to what you will have achieved in an unlevered position. For leverage to make sense, we expect that your investment return should be greater than your borrowing rate. So let's decompose the return of a levered portfolio. So this is the formula, and we need to be familiar with it. But to make sense out of it, to paint a much more practical experience, imagine I have 10 million and I'm looking at investing in a portfolio worth 100 million. That means I need to go borrow 90 million. So technically speaking, how many times am I levered? I am 9 times levered. That's 90 divided by 10. 90 is what I borrowed. 10 is my equity. So I am 9 times levered. So let's imagine that the return on my investment is 20%. And let's also imagine that the borrowing cost is 15%. So this type of investment makes sense because my investment return is greater than my borrowing rate. So let me paint a good scenario to help understand this formula. My whole portfolio is 100 million. That's what I've invested in. So that will be 100 million. But the return I will earn on the 100 million is how much? That's 20%. Because that's our return on investment. So it's 20%. Then minus, I need to pay interest on my borrowed fund. And the amount I borrowed is 90 million. So that's 90 million times, what's the borrowing rate? We agreed is 15%. Then divided by my original investment. My original investment is 10 million. So moving on, let's still further decompose this return. So I'm sure we are fine with this first one now. So let's move to the second formula, which is this. So now let's focus on my equity alone that I invested. What I invested is 10 million times what's the return on the equity that I invested. The return is 20%. But don't forget that I borrowed how much? I borrowed 90 million. But the 90 million I borrowed is at what rate? Is at 15%. But on that 90 million, I will earn 20% on it. So I'm still in a good position. So net off, I'm earning 5% on the borrowed amount. So I'll pay 15% and I would receive 20% on the 90 million. So I'm still in a good position. Then divided by what? Divided by my original equity, which is 10 million. So we can see that it's exactly what we have in the second formula here. So I want to believe we should be good to go. So whichever method you decide to use, whether the first formula or the second formula, you are still good to go. So let's look at the third formula. So as far as the third is concerned, you are guaranteed that the minimum return you will earn is 20%. The only thing you want to do is to enhance your return. So for you to enhance your return, you decided to go borrow 90 million. And we already said for leverage to make sense, your investment return should be greater than your borrowing rate. So let's say plus, how many times are you levered? You are levered 9 times. And that's what we have here. That's VB all over VE. Then times the net return. The net return, I'm receiving 20% on the borrowing rate, and I'm receiving 20% and I'm paying 15%. So that's 20% minus 15%. And I should have this. So that's it. I guess we can move on. It's worth noting that you need to know these 3 formula, but if your mathematics is good, I want to believe knowing one to be fine, then you can derive the other one. But if your mathematics is not so good, it's better you work with the logic I talked about earlier.